Today, we discuss the place of horses in the Montana backcountry. It may seem like a relatively insignificant topic, but to some, it can be very contentious. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. Thank you for joining. I'm Calen. Brandon is my father and co-host. If you just found us, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also find us at the social media handles below. Today, we will discuss horses in the mountains. Normally, we've been talking, well, at least not normally, but recently, we've been talking beef and the ranching lifestyle. However, part of our business, and we've discussed this many times, it's not just a business, but it's also some of the stuff that we enjoy also revolves around the horses, that, and specifically for us, gated horses. When we decide to escape for a few days to the mountains, oftentimes it involves a long ride with the horses and a pack horse or two, because we don't like to use our legs. So in Montana, it is common to find men and women riding horses on trails throughout the mountain wilderness areas during the summer and fall seasons prevalently. Why? Well, the summer for camping, it's kind of self-explaining. It also is nice because you get to enjoy the cooler air. For anybody unfamiliar with Montana, it does get to triple digits during the summertime. People don't think that, but it does. And so going to the mountains can reduce that by 10 to 15 degrees, believe it or not. And then of course in the fall, it's for hunting. Why not use those critters to help you pack out some meat? So we'll go over why exactly do we use the horses other than just being lazy, the benefits and advantages of having those critters up in the mountains with us, Dad's use of the horses specifically when he was a game warden, and then some courtesies and expectations when you're coming across people, hikers, other riders, when you're going down narrow roads or trails, whether you're actually riding the horse or you have them in a trailer, housing the horses in common areas. We've talked about that before, but we'll cover it again here. Some considerations before you take the horses to the mountains and considerations while you're in the mountains. And then of course, reasons why others may not approve or support the horse in the use of the backcountry, like we've talked, I alluded to at the beginning of this in the introduction. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dad for his initial comments on horses in the mountains.
Love them. Like to take them up. It's good work for the horses as well. And some of the training, kind of the end of it, I do is taking a horse up into the mountains just as a trail ride, or I may take a pack horse. And if I'm working two horses at the same time, I'll pack one, I'll ride one, and I'll go in there, 6-8 miles on usually a fairly populated trail, so that those horses will get used to people and sometimes bikes if it's not in the wilderness. Backpackers, lots of noise, dogs, all of that kind of stuff. And I'll ride them in, and then I'll swap horses. I'll ride the one I packed out and then pack the one I rode on the way out. So I get both horses to use both saddle and pack saddle on a single trip and get some miles on them. It's a really good training exercise, good for them. And you know what? It ain't bad to just be on a horse in backcountry either. So
what Dad's explaining too is that's kind of like if you were to think of it as like school or something, that's like the final exam for the horses in a sense. And then of course it's not always like an overnight trip either. It's just sometimes it's like you're talking about a really popular trail is over in Red Lodge, Montana, which is a pretty big tourist area. And we go to a place called Lost Lake. It's been found many times. It's kind of the running joke, but like Dad said, you'll take one up in a pack saddle and one you're riding, and then just swap the saddles when you get up there and come back down. And you see plenty of people running and screaming, little kids, occasionally a llama, which apparently my horse absolutely hated, even though he had seen them multiple times. Yeah, just things like that. So it's something that's beneficial.
A goofball, but yeah, and the intent to do that is not to spend the night. It was just a day trip for two horses and just a training deal. And if one of the horses doesn't respond as well as I want, then they'll get another trip another day and shortly. So it takes a lot of expense and a lot of time to do that, but it's worth it because you're doing a training that you can't simulate. You can't, like they do in a trail ride class of a horse show where they'll lay down a blue tarp and that's your water. No. I mean, it's good to get them to do things like that, but this is real world stuff. So, it's good to do it.
That's a good point, though. Is people do think about that. Well, they're just crossing a small ditch or a stream or something, but going up in the mountains, suddenly there's
Bridges?
the ridges and just the the crashing of the water as it goes
Right.
across all that. Like that's something that the horses, they see it for the first time. They just kind of perk their ears up and like, what is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. A small waterfall
Right.
is something that is, a little bit unnerving to a horse that's more accustomed to dry land. Um, Foamy water, the roar of the water coming down over the top of a bunch of boulders, bridges, culverts, because there are some culverts back there that have been packed in either the Forest Service, or usually it's done by organizations like the Backcountry Horsemen. They'll have a chapter that'll take a trail and work on it, or there's certain businesses that will do the same thing, mostly for hikers, but they still do some of that trail work. Um, you do your own trail work sometimes too. Sometimes you got to cut out trail or trees that have come down, um, cut it up, pack it out, drag it, to help somebody else out too. So it's a way to also keep that ground open for hikers, other horses, mules, you name it, be able to still access some of those lakes back there. And then there's, beyond Lost Lake, be like that little Kaiser Brown. It's a beautiful little lake, just a couple more miles up, and then go up on top to September Morn, which is almost at the top of the divide to go down over into the West Fork of Rock Creek. So, yeah, that's a really good trail to take. All of the traffic kind of peters out after Lost Lake though, because it's just a good day hike for people, and that's
Right.
what I'm after, is trying to get as much exposure to all of those headless animals that horses see as a backpacker. The big
Yeah.
old backpack. They look like they got no head, and it spooks them the first time or two they see that. So, and having good interaction with people, kind of trying to be an
Right.
ambassador for that and talk to people, be friendly. Hey, how you doing? How's it going? Beautiful day to be out, isn't it? And being really friendly. There's some people that, they are not friendly on both sides of that, whether they're, riding an animal or whether they're a hiker. And some hikers absolutely hate horses because they
Right.
think that just because a horse takes a crap on a trail, that's unholy, on or they tear the ground up. And yeah, horses do move rocks, but ironically it were people with horses that put those trails in the first place. So
Yeah.
you know people tend to forget that they think it's all about them, and that there shouldn't be any kind of a multiple use type for any kind of a trail that they think that they own.
I
So
think that's a good way to where good place to start. That's not where I intended to start, but I think it is a good kind of segue is um the courtesies and expectations when coming across other people on the roads and the trails. Not a lot of the times there is plenty of room, but um you don't know the level of horses that you might be coming across. They might be experienced, or this could be their first time. Like us, most of the time it's the first time they're seeing something like this. What I'll have you kind of explain some of those expectations, but to caveat with what you explained as the ambassador, I've gone hiking. I like to stay active physically as well. I love riding horses, but let's be honest here, it's not that physically excruciating or or
not like a hike
expect
is,
tolling.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll go hiking for a day by myself, but I always try to, and I think you'll explain it in a second. Get off to the side, let the horses go by, and the reason why that. But I'll always do that as well. I'll try to, hey, good morning and stuff. And I've had some people, riders, that they just walk on by and they don't even try to acknowledge you. I'm like, come on, man, I'm on the same side as you. But if I'm not interested in horses or anything like that, I completely understand where some of these hikers get this mentality, because you're making it like, hey, this trail's mine. Get out of the way. I don't care. I'm like, that's not the attitude to have. That is absolutely, it's just disrespectful, and it causes that further rift in enjoying the same place that we all want to enjoy, just in slightly different ways.
Yeah, no, and that's why I try to be as nice as possible,
Right.
because um, when you're going up a trail with horses, even if you're just riding a single horse, and let's say you've got, a half a dozen people that are hiking, the horse has the right of way. The hikers must get off the trail or allow the horse to pass.
And why is
That's
that?
that's
Can you
just the
explain
way
that?
it is. I think partially is because you may have a string of horses that are being used to either pack something in for or road repair or trail repair, or they're trying to get somewhere to stash or cache some hay or grain or whatever the case may be. But the horses have the right of way because they're larger and are a lot harder to maneuver or to
Yeah.
be able to manage around some of these trails.
Yeah, I think that's the important part is the fact that a human can step off a couple of feet and very easily and not be in danger. But depending on where you're at, sometimes just a foot or two could be very life threatening for a larger equine animal, or like you said, a string of animals.
Right. Yeah, and if you've got, 3 or 4 horses that you in a pack string, like, and you're riding one, um, your management of that is not as good as you would think it is. I mean, those animals are coming along because partially they've done it before, and usually when you got that many, you've got some that have been up a trail a time or two. So
Yeah.
you're trying to minimize that risk as well. But the horse does have the right of way. But you know what? When I'm meeting other horses, and sometimes happens, it's like, okay, who can get off the road or
Yep.
the trail in the best spot, and that's really what it boils down to. And you try to see, who can manage their animals in a small little clearing, or it's a little flatter, or they can climb up a little bit where the other one may not be able to do that. So you work that out among you as well. But yeah, there are people, and I've been by them too. They've been just complete jackasses on horseback, and I've also went by hikers that are complete jackasses, and try to force you off the road or spook your horse, and it's like that's a bad day for them.
Yeah.
Um, and most of the time, most of the hikers that I meet, whether they're fishing or they're just out for a ride, you stop and talk to them, and you're just friendly and say hi. Invariably, they will say, "Oh boy, that's a beautiful horse."
Yep.
And I'll say, "Hey, yeah, if you want to pet him, or if they got kids with them, you
Oh
can
yeah.
you can put your hand up, and you can touch his nose. It's real soft, and they'll smell you, and you just give them something positive to work with, and to come away from like, hey, that guy was friendly, even let us touch his horse.
Right.
How little does that take, and you're trying to at least, at the very least, mend a poor view of some group, and horse people being the group, from a hiker or someone. So, it's just kind of nice to be able to do that. And some places, some people don't understand. They'll hide behind a tree.
Yeah.
That's not the thing to do.
Maybe
So
come in
I'll
front of
say,
the tree.
yeah, I'll say, hey, if you don't mind, can you let him see your whole body? And I don't care whether they get down off the trail or up above the trail. It's easier for them to climb usually, but hey, if you can see you, he won't be afraid of you, and that's something that they can take with them. That's a tool that they have from that time on. But um, and not hold people up if you can. And if I got people that are really, and rarely can anybody outwalk these horses. I mean, I can't remember really a time that I did. Maybe when you're off and doing some watering or something, and you've just passed somebody and they might get around you.
Right.
But if I see somebody that I'm holding up, I'll pull off and let them go around me. Why would I force them to, stick behind a string of horses? That's just kind of rude to do that. So
Well, and
be a little flexible.
one side note to that too is with just trying to be cordial and friendly as well as normally the places we go, there's bears. So what does that invariably result in us doing? We carry. So we have firearms on us practically all the time. And so coming from people who are also stewards of firearms, we also try to be that ambassador as well of, hey, you can be friendly and be armed and not be a threat to anybody around you. So I would say, just as a
Point.
side note, that has nothing to do with the horses as well. There's also that piece more, especially as more and more people are coming into Montana that are not fans of firearms. I think that's also a good opportunity for us to also be the person that says, here we are with a firearm on our hip. We're friendly, we're safe, we're not here to threaten anybody. This is purely for self-defense. So
Yeah, it's a
I
defense
think that's
weapon.
another thing.
Yeah.
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 Um,
I have been on some trails where people are all of a sudden, I come up on them and they're balled up, and they're a bunch of them and they're not moving. And I'm like, oh, hey, what's going on? And I go, there's a bear up there. We're afraid to go through there. And like, oh,
oh,
what kind of bear? Did you see it?
yeah.
It was big. Well,
Well,
okay.
they're all big when you're
They're
not.
all big. That's right. And so, and none of them have weapons, and they're all
Yeah.
just, and so I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead of you guys. And usually those bears they'll be afraid of horses and, just bigger, larger, more noisy animals. And I said, make some noise when you're coming up. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. And I've went up and I've seen Mr. Bear, and it's like a poor little
A
2-year
yearling.
old that's been kicked away. It's like, okay, yeah, he's big. Oh, but
Uh,
I mean it. But you don't know. It could be. I've had moose in
right.
that. So which you don't screw with a moose.
Nope.
So I would way rather run into a black bear than a moose.
I remember us being up in I think it was the Spanish Peaks over by Big Sky that one time. We came across that big bull moose in the meadow, and wow, that was first of all beautiful to see in person. Awesome. I mean, he would have been a real trophy to have up on the wall. But the first thing we thought all together was, okay, let's give him plenty of room.
Sure.
And he just kind of sat there and ate and watched us walk, and we just made sure we stayed around and gave him plenty of space. Because yeah, I
Yep.
agree. Don't want to mess with a moose.
Yeah.
That's
No,
not.
grizzly bear's another different story. That's
Yeah.
a whole nother adventure. But generally they're wanting to get away from you anyway, and that's where the noise
Right.
comes in. Just it doesn't bother me to make plenty of noise going up. You're hearing rocks move. They're kicking rocks. They're climbing up some of these shelves and stuff that are on the trail. So you've got horses they're breathing maybe louder if you're climbing a lot. You've got some of your tack is making noise. Big deal. A lot of times I think we don't see a lot of game that's there that has seen us or smelled us and decided to vacate at
Right.
least a little bit. So I think that happens a lot. But
Oh,
no, it is something that people, and depending on what they like and the idea they have, some people don't want horses back there and have tried to ban horses. And you gotta not tie a horse up for days on end at a high line on a spot. If you're going to graze them, you're going to picking them lightly. Keep moving those horses around so that they're utilizing the grass. It actually does some of that grass some good, but you don't just pound that area to where it's powder, and not camping right on the creek or right on a lake. I mean, there's some regulations about how far away you can be on those too.
right. The other thing too, we're talking specifically about the roadways and the trails sorry, the trails and places where you may come across hikers and so forth. But also that it does kind of come over towards the trailering aspect too. You got to get to the trailhead. Sometimes those roads are pretty narrow and you've got the trailer. What are some of the I think the is it actual the legal laws of the road? What are you supposed to do to if you come across a trailer and a pickup with stock in it? If you're coming up the hill or down the hill, what's some of the practices that are supposed to be enforced on that?
Well, I believe you can, and I don't think I'm wrong on this, but you can check it, that if you're going up, two vehicles meet on, say, a logging road, that the one going up has the right of way, and the one coming down has to get out of the way. And you think about that as a matter of, if you're driving a vehicle, say a logging truck, and you got to gear down, um, and you're going up a hill with a load, because it isn't always just straight down something. It's
Right.
I believe they
Switchbacks.
have the right. Yeah, I believe they have the right of way, but I could be wrong on that. But before you do that, you'd want to check on that and say, okay, if I'm going on some kind of a road like this that is absolutely narrow, where it's a one you know passenger or one passage at a time, who gets what? And there's some trails, say up in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, that are extremely narrow, and so narrow that there are signs on either side of the pass that between after a certain hour you can't go on that, because you have to let the ones on the other side come. And so they vary those so that you can, like, only up until noon can you get on that, or 10 o'clock or whatever. And you've got like 3 hours that you can get on it, and the other one can't get on there until after 1 o'clock. You got to be off that. Otherwise you meet, neither of you can turn around. You're I don't know what the hell you'd do,
Yeah.
as it's straight down on one side and straight up on the other.
Okay, so going back to the original thing that I was going to start off with, why horses? And then not only with that, but what are some of the benefits and disadvantages of having horses in the mountains?
Well, I mean, horses are more prevalent. I mean, we seem to have more of them. You don't see as many mules around. Mules are there, but um, horses are a good animal. They're they fit the purpose, and most people can handle a horse. Mules are a really good alternative, and I know a lot of guys that would, go to their dying breath saying mules are the only way to go. And mules are great. They're very sure-footed. Mules generally almost always will not hurt themselves. Horses will get themselves in a bind. They'll panic, where mules don't do that. The only time I've ever seen a mule hurt themselves is when they've been left alone and you take some horses away from them. They're very gregarious and they love horses because mama was a horse.
Right.
And so that's the only time I've ever seen a mule hurt themselves. And that was just trying to be with them. They didn't want to be left alone. And that may be just that particular animal was that way, or those few animals were that way, and the rest of them are good. Because we haven't handled a ton of mules. I mean, you've trained some mules, or a mule. I've worked mules and ridden them and packed them and, done just fine with them. So they are a different kind of animal, but very good, very well suited for their sure-footedness and their level-headedness. So that's the disadvantage to having a horse, is that they don't act like a mule. In that case, you got a really good option when you have a mule with you.
Now, we have used mares before, or
Mm-hmm.
attempted to use mares in our advantage for hunting. Can you explain? Do you actually think that actually helped us in trying to? It was moose hunting at the time. Do you think that actually helped us, or not? And why did we do it?
Yeah, I don't think we had any advantage there. We took a mare that was in heat and rode her, or packed. I don't remember. I think a little of both. When we were moose hunting, and a lot of times moose will key in even on a horse mare in estrus, will key in on that in the fall. That it's like there's another moose, a cow moose to breed, that she's ready to breed. And I think really, I don't think it did us any good, because where we were at, there weren't a lot of moose left in there. They were pretty skittish because there were wolf tracks everywhere, and moose were few and far between. We hunted a long time before we were able to find a moose that was able to be harvested. But I don't know. It didn't do us any good at the time, and I think it maybe just because of the wolf issue. But I've heard of guys doing that and had an advantage where at least it didn't spook those moose off. And it's not that you spook a moose off too often anyway. Sometimes you do, but those that we were around when Braden shot his moose, they're pretty skittish. And I think it was just because of the wolf problem, where most of the time you run across a moose, they just look at you like, what are you gonna do about me? I'm bigger and badder than you are,
Well,
they're usually not bothered.
And I guess to kind of continue that, because the reason why I asked that is kind of the benefits and continue that benefits disadvantages of having horses. But the other part to that is I think it ultimately did help us get Braden's moose, because we had heard from a hunter who had been around. I think he was looking for deer or elk, and then he saw us kind of glass, and you talked to him and goes, "Hey, he's not big. He's a yearling." We're like, "We'll take anything because we can't find anything."
Was it like a day before the end of season?
It was the last day of season.
It was the last day.
Yeah. And so he said, "Hey, I saw a yearling down here," and we started moving towards him, and we were on horseback. And I remember going through a meadow where it was kind of a meadow. It was just a bunch of really, it was willows that were probably shoulder high for us. And we were keeping an eye out, and suddenly I looked to the right and I saw him with his head popped up, and I whispered to you across all the horses as lightly as I could without alarming everybody. I said, "Hey, I see him." And you looked back, and I pointed, and there he was. And I think that's where the advantage was we were on horseback, and he couldn't really tell that there were really humans there. He probably smelled us and thought, "Oh, this is interesting." But because we had the horses with us, he was just like, "Yeah, it's just another animal, not a big deal." And Braden ultimately was able to harvest him.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's unreasonable to logically think that. I've also been in the backcountry fishing on the ground and come around a big old pile of like choke cherry, and all of a sudden here's this big bull moose. I mean, within 15 feet of him, I was like, oh crap.
Let me climb a tree real quick.
Just kind of back, and he just kind of looked at you and just kept chewing and watching me, and I'm like, this is yours, bud. And I'm just kind of back out of there, and we went around him and let him go. And God, if I'd had a rifle and a tag, that would have been a beauty too. But you run into stuff like that, and sometimes I rarely see moose that are really spooked.
Hmm.
They're just like, I'm so big that nothing really bothers me.
I think that's what it
And
is. Their size, their
yeah,
sheer size. There's nothing much that can take them.
right. And the problem was, I think where we were early on, trying to get that moose for Braden was, it was so infested with wolves that, there's so many wolves there, and moose are generally solitary, that if they key in on them, they'll run them to death. They're done,
Right.
and so that's part of the issue there. They get spooky of anything then.
Now, going back to your past life, you were a warden for 10 years and you went to the backcountry quite a bit. You used horses quite a bit in the backcountry, both state owned and owned through you and mom and grandpa. Again, using that as an advantage to kind of finish out the horses, but then also not having to use non-gated horses because it was just that was personal preference at that point. Uh,
The horses
what?
the horses the state had were not good horses. They wouldn't
Yeah.
they wouldn't they wouldn't spend the money to buy good horses.
So they're going down
And
and getting like the $100 horses out of the ring and just making it work.
the most they would spend for a horse was $500. Well,
Oof.
we're
Okay.
selling them for 5,000.
Yeah.
So, and you had to hunt to find a decent horse. And I found a couple of horses, but the problem was they're only as good as the guys that use them.
Right.
So you've got that issue too. And most of the guys didn't, they weren't all that tuned up. One guy really was at Big Timber, but the rest of them were like, no, so it was tough to do that. And I just did not like riding the state horses because of that. It's like, I want to ride a horse that I can cover some miles on.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask is how did you use the horses and what was the benefit to being a warden using horses in the backcountry? And when you went, like how long would you go in the backcountry and how many horses would you take to support you during that time?
Well, it depended. I rarely took more than one pack horse for just myself.
Hmm.
If it was just me, I'd have a riding horse and a pack horse, and I'd pack that horse up. I could go for, God, I could go for 10 days probably easily on one pack horse, and that's taking a real small tent, and being able to stay dry, some change clothes, and then my food and a bedroll, and then most of it's food. And I would even take some grain for the horse, and then I would let them graze. But yeah, I could probably stretch that to 10, easily 7 days, seven for one person and one pack horse. Yeah, that's no big deal, especially if the weather's decent, which it's not going to stay decent. It rains every afternoon in the mountains generally,
Right.
so you just get a light shower. But and that's you just utilize what you've got too, like your sling ropes on your pack saddle. You use those as your picket ropes. You take them off and picket your horse and let them feed. And you're moving all the time, so I could cover a lot of ground, and make a lot of contacts, see a lot of people with our gated horses, because I could travel so much more efficiently, um, by doing it with them.
Were there any wardens that flat out refused to use horses? They would go to the mountains and they would do things and they would say, "No, I'm not using horses or mules. That's not my thing. I hate four-legged critters. So I'm going to do it
Yeah,
on my own two legs or whatever else they use."
yeah, no, there were some guys that are just not comfortable with them, and just didn't have any skill, and those that didn't have a lot of skill would usually go with somebody who did. And
Okay.
it was kind of fun for them. They could learn something, but for those guys to go on their own by themselves, no. And that was a good decision, because you can get tore up pretty easily if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
That could be a death sentence. And so they felt a lot safer just walking in, and good for them. That's fine. There's no issue with that. It's just about being smart about staying safe, and what your comfort level is, and it may take you a little bit more time, but they could actually, on a hike, maybe get some places a horse couldn't go. If you had a bunch of blowdown on a trail, you could spend a day clearing out trail where they could just walk around it.
Right.
So there's some advantages of being on foot too. There was a Forest Service guy named Blaze DeLulo, and Blaze used to trap problem beaver for me. When people had issues with beaver, he would trap them out. And Blaze, that guy was amazing. He walked everywhere, and I mean, he would start at you know Red Lodge, and or even the East Rosebud, and end up in Cook City, or you just had a pack, and the guy walked everywhere, and he was short, stocky, and just a good guy, really good guy, and he walked everywhere. He probably rode some mules or something the Forest Service had, or some horses, but I never saw him horseback. I never saw him mounted. I always saw Blaze, wearing a pair of whites, and man, he could take off, and it was you'd have to do you'd have to do something to keep up with Blaze if you were walking with him. That guy was an animal, and
Yeah.
I think Blaze is gone now, but yeah, I had a lot of respect for him.
I was gonna ask. Oh, we have a horse, or we had a horse in at the ranch at one point, with an infamous reputation. I personally don't remember him, but I know he was around for a little bit when I was little, and his name was Dusty. You took Dusty to the mountains a couple, once or twice as a warden. Uh, he was a special case because he was one of those special critters where he could just take off and he could go and he could just last forever. What was some of the more productive days in terms of getting contacts with people out there, you're fishing and everything, and still covering mileage from one point to the next?
That's a good one. I think I covered, but and Dusty he was a horse that was just a he was an animal. That horse he just wanted to move, and he was too much horse for most people. I think there was only 3 people that really rode him. That was your uncle and me and grandpa. Otherwise, he was just too much horse for people. You just couldn't trust him. So, if I was going alone somewhere and say doing a day trip, a long day trip, not needing a pack horse, I could take that horse and just smoke the trails. It was impressive, and I think I covered like 22 miles one day with him.
And that's while
Uh,
still making contacts with people. That's not
and
just
making Yeah,
riding.
no, that's not just riding. That's
Right.
taking time to talk to people and check them out and check licenses. That was probably oh God, I'm guessing that was probably a 10-hour day covering that kind of mileage, which is impressive in the mountains, and
Right.
making all those contacts. And I don't know how many. I checked a lot of people because I could get a lot of distance.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
yeah.
for reference, for people that don't know it, uh, you, me, Grandpa, and Braden, and then another trip, you, me, Braden, and a former teacher, former coach, family friend,
Oh yeah.
went 2 separate trips of those two four-man groups. Uh, we like to go to a certain lake that I will not disclose because I don't want people ever taking it. But that trip in itself is about 20 miles, and it takes us from about 8 o'clock in the morning until it's getting close to dark to get up there with a small pack stream and the 4 guys. So putting that into perspective, about 20 miles, and you're saying roughly 22 while making contacts. Granted, it's just you and him. There's no pack horses and stuff, but that's a very impressive mileage to cover with an animal like that.
Well, and that's the only reason I could is because I was alone. If I'd have been packing a pack horse, I couldn't do that because that pack horse would either, play out or just shake a pack because that horse could just God, he was amazing.
Yeah.
Um, some parts of me misses him, and other parts of me are like, nah, I'm glad he's gone. So yeah, he was something else. He was an impressive horse.
Now, going into the mountains, there's always a potential issue with going into common areas, and I know we have had a discussion about this before, and I'm writing it down so I remember. But I'll try and put a link up above. But there's issues sometimes with common areas and horses and putting them into a common corral or a common hitching area or something to that effect. Can you kind of explain some of the things? And this would be, I would argue, also a disadvantage as well with horses. This is something you definitely have to be aware of, be prepared for, and take care of your animals and be with it all, because this could potentially result in ultimately a death of your horse if something bad were to get contracted. So you want to explain that a little bit as well?
Well, one of the things we don't do is when there are spots at a trailhead where you can tie your horse up and a feed bunk, or like you say, a small corral that you can tie your horses in, either inside or turn them loose inside, or tie them up outside, or other people's horses get nose to nose. Anytime you do that, you can transmit disease, and you don't know where somebody else's horse has been. um, some people will kick out hay and stuff, or leave hay at one of these spots. I don't let these horses eat them. They don't get anything that I don't control, because uh, we I've known some people that have done that, and they're like, "Oh, look, this is awesome! I let my horse eat this hay up," and next thing you know, his horse in another week was sick and near death, and they saved the horse, but he had a ton of vet bills, and I didn't know if that horse was going to pull through. He was sick, and never did really know what it was. They were treating symptoms, and I mean, lost a bunch of weight. And a horse has got a very robust immune system. I mean, we used horses in our humans. So when I say we, for building serum antibodies
Right.
for different things. So they've got a fantastic immune system, but you don't know who's been there, where they've come from, what they've had. You have no idea. And so in the summertime, you get people coming from all over the place. So I try not to let their anybody else's horses even touch noses or talk or introduce themselves like horses want to. I don't allow that. And then when I pull into those places, if we got a horse trader, I pull all my horses out and I tie them to that trailer. Leave them tied to your trailer. Don't let those guys get in those common areas. I mean, you're just asking for trouble. And then one horse gets sick, gets the rest of them sick, you bring them home, and then your whole herd gets sick. You could lose a horse. And there's some things like rhinopneumonitis. That is a horrendous disease. You lose 10-15% of your herd when they get rhino. So um, distemper. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you could allow them to pick up. So we try to keep them as isolated as absolute possible. And when you're going with somebody, you kind of know who you're going with, and you know how they handle their horses and whether they're up on vaccines, shots, where they've been. You kind of feel that stuff out ahead of time, so you make it a priority for your horse's health.
Now, if you were to get in a predicament where you did have to use or take advantage of the common areas for some reason, emergency reason, whatnot, what do you have any suggestions on what to do, either as aftercare, or maybe as something as like a preventive while you're about to take advantage of the common area, or any suggestions that would potentially protect those animals at the best that you possibly can?
Yeah, in a common area like that, I would try to, if I had to, uh, I would make sure that they didn't get into any feed that was left over. No hay. I would try to tie them to that area where it has been used the least, and then if there's any manure around there, make sure they can't get to it. Keep their heads up. You may have to tie them a little shorter, things like that, just so that you're trying to, again, minimize contact as much as you possibly can. Usually you've got, and I know they don't like it, but you've usually got trees around there. I'd go to I'd go to a tree away from that area if I had to, because it's that serious. It only takes one outbreak to
Right.
lose a horse or ruin a bunch of uh, time and expense to repair the health on a horse.
Now, I didn't put this in here as a talking point, but I just thought of it, and that's the the I guess the controlling of the herd. Do you recommend using uh, pickets, high lines, uh, electric fence? I don't really know of any other. I've heard of electric fence. I know we use picket and high line a lot. And then we also do free grazing as well on occasion. We'll let one horse go and let them graze by themselves, collect them up as they start getting bored, and put them back on the line. But do you know of other methods of doing it, and why do you prefer to do highline, picket, and so forth?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I like to highlight. I like to not have all of your horses um, contained the same way. For instance, I'm not going to build a big corral, and we've got some electric fence that we could use, pack in. It takes a little bit to pack it in. You're going to use more and more horses that way. We tend to be minimalists in a way, even though we have pack horses, but rope corrals the same way. I don't put all of my animals in one spot where, and they're smart, they get out, or wolves, and we've had wolves come through a camp and had a horse break a picket, um, and knock down a high line. I mean, they just panicked, but we had them spread out, and some picketed, some high lined, so that you've always got some horses left over if you have to run some horses down. If you lose all your horses at once, now you're not riding, and that's not fun. And how far can a horse travel? They'll travel all the way back to your trailer. If you're back there 20 some miles, or whatever mileage it is, they'll go home. And so, trying to minimize that with the impact. If a couple of horses are grazing better, and some are on a high line and their grazing has been limited, then I'll swap them, and I'll move them around, and doing that. And there are some high line areas that have been pre-used. I'll use them, but I don't let those horses touch that ground either. They're tied to the high line. They're tied to basically a high line is a rope between trees that are set up so it doesn't harm the tree, yet it's tight, and that horse has to stand there underneath of it. So I'll move those around so you're not tearing things up so much. Alternate them so some can graze, and then the free grazing, you're right, turn that horse loose with a lead rope on their halter and just let them go. And when they're wanting to eat, they'll stick pretty close. But when you see them starting to get picky about what they want to eat, they're not hungry anymore. So go grab them and pick them up and put them back either on a picket or a high line. Usually I'll high line them because they've had a pretty good fill of grass. So there's a number of ways to do that. I'm not wild about the electrical at night, because of exterior. You can have bears come through, you can have wolves come through and lose all your horses or several of them. But it can be done. If you had more of a permanent camp, that might be a better way to do it, because they'll get used to where those stakes and where your ribbon type of electrical line is, which is always better. They can see it that way too, and their night vision is better than ours, so they can tend to pick that out, especially if it's light colored. Contrasts a lot with the dark around. So yeah, there's a variety of ways to do it. All of them good, but you can overdo them too. You don't want to just leave a horse picketed in one spot for 3 days. I mean, good God, that thing would be just tore up, and powder, and weeds start to develop, and erosion, just all kinds of bad stuff.
When you pick it, what foot do you pick it on, and why?
Yeah, good one. Yeah, I just take it for granted. We normally pick it by a hind foot.
Most people pick it by the front foot, don't they?
Or their halter.
Or halter. Okay.
Yeah. And so if you pick it by a hind foot, those horses will tend to pick that foot up, and they'll walk right over the top of a rope. Or if you pick it by a front, they'll sometimes turn and they'll wind themselves around, and they'll burn a rope burn on those hind hocks. You see that? That's a very common thing you see in horses in the backcountry. You say, oh, somebody burned a hind hock there. They had them picketed by either the halter will do the same thing. It raises that a rope up instead of being down on the ground, but they can still get around their hind end and burn them. And that hind foot allows that horse to reach and gives you a little bit more perimeter for them to graze and not impact the ground quite as much. So just a single hind foot picket, those joints are strong. We've had horses come right to the end of them. And fact is, one of them, when that wolves come through the camp one night, she hit the end of that and broke that line, which was a half-inch sling rope, and she snapped it right in two. Didn't harm her a bit. So if you pick it to a front foot, they can pull lots of ligaments and tendons in that are because you don't have a joint in a front shoulder on an ungulate like that. They're all, horses, cows, deer, elk, moose. They've all of that front shoulder is held together by ligaments and tendons, not by a joint like what we have. So, or joints like in their hind legs. So you can really do some pretty good damage to a leg that way too, especially if they go sideways to it and pull it out. So to me, it's always safer to do that hind leg. We've never had an issue, ever have we ever had an issue. So
knock on wood, we continue
yeah.
to do that.
Oh yeah, you sure could. And not that we haven't burned, a horse hasn't burned themselves. They have, but it's been very minimal because they're moving their feet better on that hind leg.
Right. Moving to considerations, both before and while you're in the mountains, what do you normally add as a consideration for either the taking the horses, the things you're going to take on the horses or with the horses, the things for the horses, things to supplement them or continue to care for them while you're in the mountains. What are some of those things to think about and to grab or acquire before and to implement during the trip in the mountains?
First aid kit that works for both
Yep.
horses and humans. And
Yeah.
when I'm talking like putting vet wrap in there, I don't even use, you know, like band-aids. I mean, you have some band-aids, but if it'll take care of a horse, it'll take care of you. Lots of gauze. Um, vet wrap is fantastic stuff. Sutures, you know, you may need to sew something up. You can sew yourself up if you had to. Needles. I'd take smaller needles for us, but you it's surprisingly what you can use and get away with. I know some guys that, and I've packed it myself as a used um, suture staples. You can clean something up really well, have something to clean up and disinfect, and then use those little staples that they use in hospitals or on dogs, say vet type deals, and they've got them left over. They're disposable. You've got so many left in there, you can use those. The sutures are important. Um, that's basically that. I don't pack a lot of hay most of the time. So occasionally we
We did it
have, but
one time, and that was
yeah,
frankly it was
it's a
stupid.
pain.
Well, there's
Yeah,
also reasons why we just foundationally we don't agree with packing hay in anyway. Like it doesn't make
right. Well,
sense as to
and it
why.
needs
But
and it needs to be certified weed free in the
right.
backcountry too, which is it's expensive, but it's you need to take several trips to get your hay cached in there, and then hope nobody steals it
Yeah. Well, but
because
your
there's that.
point too though, like you've made this multiple times, is it's certified weed free in order to make sure weeds are not spread out in mountains. 100% support that, understand why it's that way. However, what do those horses bring with them? It's whatever they've been eating, and when they defecate, they're gonna drop seeds for the weeds and the stuff that you're trying to prevent from bringing. So it's in a weird
You're
way, it's like you're null and voiding the entire
right.
process.
Well, and you're supposed to do that, but I'll bet you most people don't. But
Right.
most people don't prep their horses, for a day or two
Right.
on some non-certified or certified weed-free hay. But we do take grain, which is processed, and it doesn't. There's no weeds in it, of course. But we do take a fair amount of grain to supplement the horses with, depending on how many days. But having something for us that the horses don't need is the absolute ability to, if it's raining, and sometimes it has done this, and you can't get dry wood, being able to get a fire started. And
Yep.
that's an important thing. You can go through a lot of hardship if you got a fire.
It
So
it's supposed to be an enjoyable thing to do,
yeah.
but it can always turn into survival at the
Mhm.
at the turn of a
Yep.
the turn of a card. Like
The
it's
wrong
quick.
the
So
wrong cloud fly over, and all
yeah.
of a sudden you're doing the same things entirely different than what you'd planned. No, that's right. Or
Okay.
something bad happens, you got to be able to have a plan to, you break a leg, you got to
Right.
be able to get yourself out of there too. That's why going alone is it's risky. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done a lot of it alone and on young horses or horses I'm training, and you try to minimize every risk you possibly can, but it's never without risk.
Right. I guess one quick thing to kind of go with that, you're talking about mostly survival stuff. Supplementing the grain, that's important just for the body weight for the animals
Mhm.
and getting through cold nights, and because it does get cold up there even during the summertime. But you're talking first aid kit. What was the other one we just covered? Fire starter. Now, what about communication? What's the best way to try and get past that one?
It's tough because
Yeah.
most of the time back there in the backcountry, there's no communication.
Yeah, I
You
was gonna
know,
say
it,
I've always left the cell phone in the pickup. Frankly, I
yeah,
just
it
it's toast.
unless now you could probably use it as a camera, but that's about as good
Right,
as it's going to get. That you're going to be use it for, and you may get to the top of a pass somewhere and be able to pick up a signal, but it's it's rare.
carrying
So
around electronic dead device.
yeah, and I don't. There's no reason. I mean, there are some things that are done by GPS, like those spot. They call them a spot, where if you get in some trouble, you hit that, and it sends a signal to GPS, and you say, "Hey, if I push this button, it means I need help." So, and there's people that pack those. So that's something that's doable. It's a good option. Um, you know, the expense after that's going to be something else. But what's your life worth? I mean, it's
Right.
how bad are you hurt? If you're hurt bad enough and you know you're going to die, you're going to die. I mean, there's nothing going to stop it.
Start making your peace.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's
Uh,
just a matter of hoping somebody can, you drop some of your camp, and in that point, you're taking a body out.
okay. You know, that was a dark way to go, but I'm
Well,
gonna
no, but it's real. I mean
No,
I
I
mean
agree.
I've been asked to put together a how-to to pack a body out, and there's others that have done it. You can do
Right.
that. I was asked to do a clinic for that way, so search and rescue guys.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk about though is um we kind of covered it briefly, but there are some people out there that they're not horse enthusiasts. They'd rather not see horses in the backcountry. They'd rather just be left to either mountain biking, or those who are wanting to run the trails or hike. For any arguments that are out there saying against horses, we've got about 9 minutes. What would be kind of your argument to say, hey, consider horses, it's not a bad thing having horses? What are some of your arguments to promote the horses and to say, it's okay, we can still kind of cohabitate in the wilderness and enjoy it different ways?
I mean that's it. I mean, everybody's got their own preference of what they want to do.
Yeah.
Why not just allow each other to do it? Um, we've become a society of you need to do what I want you to do, or you can't do that because I don't care for it. I don't care what you think, what you want, what you think you need. I don't tell you what to do. I'm not harming anything. I'm not infringing upon you. So what's the point?
Yeah.
But there are people that just absolutely, abhor horses. There's people that absolutely abhor motorcycles and four-wheelers. I mean, I'm not wild about seeing them and hearing them either. But you know what? If they're in a spot where they can do it, okay, that's what they like to do. It's all right. I'm not going to tell them they can't. So
Well, and I
it's
would
a bad.
say the only argument against four wheelers and motor and dirt bikes or something that you're bringing up that I think would apply to horses is the ground part, right? We really don't want the ground to be broken up and just destroyed. Like you were talking about, leaving a horse in a picket for the same spot for 10 days and it turns to dirt.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to do that from on the horses part. We would expect the same respect out of those who use motorized vehicles as well. They can use it all they want, but stay to the trails. Don't try and destroy the ground. It is pretty fragile up in the mountains. That ground can really get broken up and destroyed very easily. So coming from the horse's perspective, that's what I would say for anybody with motorized stuff. I don't care. Personally, I don't like hearing them. I would like to hear the birds and the animals out there. I kind of enjoy it, but I understand, like you said, if they're out there, but definitely be stewards of the ground and definitely take care of it and treat it very, very carefully so that the rest of us can enjoy it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't just, it's not been that many generations ago that these trails were put in.
Right.
I mean, really is very, very short time. They've only been in, 100 years, maybe, some of them less than that.
Right.
I'd like to see, you know, another couple of 100 years of my ancestors being able to do exactly the same thing, travel these same trails, be able to see some of the sites I've saw in relatively similar fashion where they're at today.
Right.
And some of those wilderness areas are just like that. You can't take a chainsaw, you can't take a motorized anything in some of these areas we go.
You can take a
That's a
handsaw. That's
you
or
take a
a
handsaw,
or a
yeah,
axe. Yeah.
right. But you can't take a chainsaw, which okay, so what? That's fine. You do that plenty, and you're minimizing more of, I think, the impact of how many trees can you cut down and then not take, which normally standing dead. So what? They're gonna fall. They're gonna rot anyway. I mean,
Right.
unless you're cutting down a bunch of clear cut and a bunch of live trees or something, it'd be way more efficient. So being able to use that ground responsibly and cause the least amount of erosion. A trail's a trail. It didn't used to be there, and it was put in there, and you're not going to change that part. You can over time if you completely neglected it. And there are some trails that have been abandoned, and good luck getting through there.
Right.
I've tried. I went on some of these trails before and went, oh yeah, not getting through this, and had to find another way around. I mean, literally another loop or a bunch of miles out of the way in order to get where you wanted to go, because the Forest Service has abandoned them.
Right. Okay, that's horses in the mountains. That's some of the courtesies, things, expectations when you're going up and down trails or roadways. Why we use horses, the benefits and disadvantages to them. What else we talk about? Some of the issues with common housing or common containment, ways that we contain, and things that you can do to make it easier on the ground. Of course, we're talking about just right then and there being stewards of the ground. Not we talk about that with the ranch, but also when you're out in the wilderness, being stewards of the ground and the land. And then of course, just considerations for the animals yourselves before and during the trip and how to stay safe. So with that, it's Dad's turn.
Trying to be that ambassador, I always thank people for getting off the road, or, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you guys getting away, letting me get by. Always thanking them. And, kind of like we do here, when we end a segment, we always want to thank you until you're better paid.